Today's lesson is dedicated to Nishmas Bila Bas Abraham Udvora. We're up to chapter 18 of the Maimer. Of course, last week we missed out, but hopefully everybody is clear or current on the idea that Hasidus brings a new perspective and enlivens and enriches and focuses the other perspectives as well. So here we go. Based on the above, what we said in chapter 17, that the introduction of Hasidus into Torah study or into a person's life does not overrun their life, meaning it doesn't steamroll through them. It brings out their life. You may recall that we use the analogy of a venture capitalist. If he sees a product that he values but is undercapitalized, if he's wise and he's talented, his investiture does not smother the success of the product. Rather, it enlivens and enriches that product. And this is an issue we all probably have encountered in our own lives. We want to bring somebody some insight. So we have to be very delicate so that we don't steamroll them, but rather we evoke it. You think about this as a parent. You think about this in any kind of interaction with the community where you may be a mentor. How do we bring out greater capacity within the student, the mentee, the child, etc., without overrunning who they are, trying to turn them into me? It's a very difficult thing to do. And Hasidus, being that it is the essence, so it's the essence of everything. And therefore, so classic example, when we say to somebody, you want to do mitzvahs, that's what you want. Just like everybody wants to be physically healthy, they want to be spiritually healthy. So it's not that this person wants to make that person do a mitzvah or wants to make that person be more like them. Our objective is to evoke the essence and the core identity of the person with whom we are interacting. This is what Hasidus does at an academic level. So now, once we have this perspective, we can now go back and revisit what we mentioned way back in the beginning as to what we find as being other speculations as to what, in fact, Hasidus is about. For even though those particular points that we made, for example, if you recall from chapter 1, we talked about how Hasidus changes the nature of our character. Not only that we can resist our natural impulses to whatever negative characteristic, whether it's laziness or it's greed or it's anger, we can even change it. Because that was one thing that we said about Hasidus. We also said that Hasidus made Kabbalistic concepts real, practical, and personal, etc. So now, although, as we explained, that those do not capture the very essence of Hasidus, however, they do illustrate how Hasidus changes our academic perspective, because that's really what we're talking about, the study of Hasidus, and that academic perspective will ultimately, of course, also change our behavioral and our societal. Because whenever you shine the essential light, you evoke and you penetrate down to every detail, and everything becomes changed by it. Like when a person is joyous, everything about what they do illustrates and evokes and expresses that joy, down to the smallest of details. And again, as we explained, this is the difference between revelation and essence. You think about this in an interpersonal form. There are people to whom I reveal certain aspects, and then there are those whom I share the very essence. And that's why there's always going to be a difference between family and friends. Of course, it's true that I may even be closer with a friend than I am with a family member, but in my essence, down to my biology, I am more closely interacted and interlinked with my family than I'm going to be even with a friend. Based on a general rule, which is quoted in a Kabbalistic book called Sefer Yetzirah, which historically is attributed to Adam, we say a rule, which we can recognize this at a human level, but it's summarized in this phrase, No'utz tchilasan b'soifan dafka, which translates as, excuse me, what it translates as, the beginning is wedged in the end. when a person begins a project, how do you know what the objective, excuse me, how do we know or see what the objective of this project is? It's from when he stops. Like there's an old saying, why is everything always in the last place you look for it? Because once you find it, you stop looking. So all that Hasidus expresses down to the most tangible, that is, the truest illustration of Hasidus is like the truest distinction between the weekend jogger and the marathoner. In the first mile, you may not be able to tell the difference. The difference is in the 20th mile. So too, the full-on essence of any concept is manifest in its most stretched of circumstances. And the most stretched, that is the most tangible illustration of the impact of Hasidus, is the transformation of our otherwise pre-programmed characteristics and impulses, known as our animalistic tendencies, that which we react with without thought. That is called the outside, like the Baal Shem Tov was told that Mashiach will come when his teachings, the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, are spread to the least naturally aligned circumstance. And even more so when we transform the world around us, meaning the most profound illustration of any idea is when it can be manifest in something pragmatic and transformative. And therefore, the previous Rebbe emphasized in many of his talks that everything that we learn in Hasidus must result in changed behavior. Because it is not only that we are emphasizing behavior, it is that we only truly grasp something when it is manifest in something physical. If you've ever had the experience where you try to write something down so that you can understand it, or you try to comprehend something by speaking it out, this is an illustration of this rule of thumb. The more something is manifest in the physical, the more it concretizes the conceptual idea. Chapter 19. And just like it is in the infinity of Hasidus, so too is it in all of Torah. This concept of the infinity of Torah is illustrated through its expression in the most tangible, in the least evidently godly circumstances. That is, to transform it and make it into a tool for godliness. This is true in all of Torah and is primarily illustrated in Hasidus. Now, this is going to be a very rabbi type of thing to say. And one issue that rabbis run into is they, of course, live in a world of Torah. So they can sometimes become oblivious to how difficult it is for people who don't spend their life involved in the pursuit of, professionally, of only getting other people to do mitzvahs. And they have to deal with scoundrels and maybe worse out there in the world. So the rabbis say, you have to go out there and you have to declare the infinity of godliness in that circumstance, which of course is the truth. It is a very difficult thing if that place is very hostile and the person is trying to hang on. So I'll give you an example. There is a trait that exists that the Rebbe has spoken about and we try to campaign against, which is that people should use their Hebrew Jewish name in the public arena. In some communities, they have a philosophy that in shul, a person is Shlomi, and out in the world, he's Steve. Now, again, I understand, at least conceptually, because it's not my world, and I mean this in all sincerity, it's easy for me to say. But the world needs more Shlomis than it needs more Steves. Now, that's nice if a person's in that authoritative position. But if he's barely holding on to his parnasa, it may be very difficult for him to bring his kedusha to it. But at least conceptually, the idea is that we don't leave our godliness in shul. On the contrary, the most profound illustration of our godliness is when we bring it into the world. And that's where it is, in a certain sense, not just also good, that is the most important. So the classic illustration being, if tomorrow we win the lottery, we have $100 million zillion, what do? Do we say, okay, we're all going to Mars and we're going to build a big giant yeshiva and we're all going to sit and study Torah there because who wants to sit here in this world? In other words, our involvement with the world is just considered a nuisance. Or are we going to say that if we have unlimited resources, we're going to make the world sing its godliness? And of course, as you recognize, the emphasis of Hasidus is that's where it's going to go. It's going to go into this physical world. We're going to build Chabad houses in the most remote and craziest of areas so we can have them on Tuesday nights. So the true illustration of the intensity of Hasidus and of Torah in general is its impact on the most ordinary of circumstances. And this is what our sages say, that Hashem created the Yetzer Hara, that he created the Torah to temper that Yetzer Hara. This seems odd. In all circumstances, of all worlds, of all circumstances, this physical world is the absolutely least naturally aligned with godliness. It's called the lowest. Obviously, it's not spatial, but it means this world or the circumstance of our existence in contrast to the angels, the godliness is lesser or is further down the awareness level here in this world than it is in the more spiritual sense, in the more spiritual circumstances. And in this physical world, what is the one aspect that is most unaware of its godly origin? That's the Yetzer Hara, which God even is described as regretting having created it. And since of all the worlds, even of the highest worlds, they have no stature when it comes to Torah, that is, they can't be in contradiction. And therefore, when King David, tried to glorify the Torah, and he said that every aspect of the world is linked to even the most minute aspect of Torah, which certainly seems to be very flattering to Torah, he was punished. Because again, it's linking the world to have some stature relative to Torah. And of course, the truth is that Torah is something far more profound than any simple word, or than any aspect of creation. So to even compare it is considered an insult to Torah, even to say that all of creation is linked to this most minute detail of Torah. So certainly, how is it possible that we could say that the creation of Torah is designed to cure or to address the Yetzer Hara? But based on what we've said, we now understand that the essence of Torah is absolutely linked with the essence of Hashem. And where is this most profoundly evident? When the Torah can address and transform and reshape that which is most naturally antagonistic to Torah, which is, of course, the Yetzer Hara. And since the capacity to cure the Yetzer Hara, to transform it to good, only comes from the very essence of Hashem. So, in other words, if you can get a bunch of people who are naturally aligned with you to be fans, that's nice. But that's where their bias is. If you can get total and complete strangers, you can win them over. I don't mean in a manipulative way. You have truly illustrated the essential bond that exists between all people. The explanation being, every revelation of godliness, as lofty as it may be, it is still considered categorizable as a revelation. It's something about Hashem. In the Talmud, we are forewarned not to make up our own compliments for God, and only to use those descriptions that Moshe Rabbeinu recites in the Torah. We'll read it in about 2 weeks' time. He says, God, you are compassionate and kind and long-suffering and so on. Why? Because although we mean well, we could wind up saying things that are semi-insulting. We say, God, you're so funny. I mean, it could be sweet, but it ultimately winds up being insulting because we're using human terms to try to describe God. It is innately a mismatch. So what we do, we use what Moshe uses. So no matter what we're going to describe about God, it's still going to be limited. It's still going to recognize that God is, even if we say, for example, God is kind. Well, we're limiting him. Maybe he's capricious, does whatever he feels like in the moment. And any description, therefore, is going to be limited. And it is sort of isolating or excluding anything that's antagonistic to it. And therefore, the only way to deal with anything antagonistic is to destroy it. It is only the very essence of Hashem that is absolutely stripped down from any sense of any form, that there can be no opposition to it. And as such, it can transform it to good. And this is what we say, that the quality of Torah, or the characteristic of Torah that is absolutely unified with the essence of Hashem, is considered as that which, and it uses a phrase in English, it sounds almost trivial, that which is entertaining to him, but not entertaining in a shallow sense. That's really where the joy is. That this joy, this true pleasure, and not a frivolous passing pleasure, but it means the truest alignment, it comes about when we illustrate that the enemy is actually the friend, that the darkness is actually God. We transform antagonism, darkness, into light. We transform an enemy into a friend. That's what truly brings God. Again, the word is joy or entertainment, something like that. It is specifically through the transformation of darkness into light that we bring this pleasure to Torah that illustrates or is an expression of the very essence of Torah, the way it is absolutely linked with the infinity of Hashem in his very identity. Now, these two ideas in the teachings of Hasidus, as well as in all of Torah, that Hasidus comes along, we're in chapter 20 now, and it enlivens and it gives new meaning to all the other levels of interpretation. So remember, if the Moda'ani is seen initially as a sort of second best because it doesn't mention God's name, Hasidus comes along and says, no, it's better that way, because it shows that no matter how detached we may think we are from Hashem, how impure we may be, we truly can never sever our essential acknowledgement of God's existence, and so on. And the way that that the teachings of Hasidus will therefore transform even the enmity of the animal soul and so forth. And that it is specifically through the teachings of Hasidus that we illustrate the very essence of Hashem, his very identity, as opposed to some aspect of Hashem. So to help us further understand this, we can find an illustration of this concept in halacha, in the aspects of Torah that deal with the matters that we can touch, feel, and measure. And this halacha will give us a further insight into the concept that we have just described. We have an interesting rule in Torah. It's one that we recognize even in our secular environment. And the rule is described in a very simple term, that a person's immediate surroundings, and we put a number on it, it is the 4 paces right around their immediate environment, are considered to be their private place, so that anything in that area is considered to be theirs. I want to run through, then I'll explain a little bit more. This is true if it's on the corner, on the side, and so on. And this comes into play in certain halachic matters that have to do with marriage and divorce, which I will explain. And this is something that the chachamim we have statutorily created to avoid conflict. I'll give you an example. We all have this experience intuitively. If we're online at the bank, there's a certain natural distance that we keep from the person in front of us. If we're out in a park or a beach and we'll lay out our blanket, there's a natural boundary, depending on the circumstance, that we keep from one another. And that space is considered your space. So if somebody walks by and says, hey, you want whatever it is, and they throw it into your space, the fact that it's landed in your space is considered that it's yours. And if somebody else says, oh, I want that, and it's just laying here on the ground, well, it's not just laying here on the ground. It's in my personal space. We talk about this a lot in other areas that we teach our children to protect themselves, but we all recognize this idea that if I'm, just use that example, if I'm sitting on the beach on my blanket, and somebody walks by and he says, hey, you want this pen? And he throws it in my space, even though I haven't picked it up and grasped it to myself and said, this is mine. The fact that it's in my space is like the fact that it's in my house or the fact that it's in my backyard. This is the rule that the Chachamim have created to avoid conflict. That's the rule. Hopefully that halachic concept is something that we recognize. Now, even though the concept here, we're going to try to illustrate what the sort of personal takeaway is. Even though this rule that this item that is placed within my immediate space is considered to belong to me, nevertheless, the Chachamim, that is the courts, have established, or not nevertheless, the courts have established that if it's in that space, it's considered mine. And that's how I have now acquired it. So again, in my example, somebody walks by and says, hey, you want this? I say, yeah, and he throws it onto my blanket or in my space. That's considered like I picked it up, like I took possession of it. It's considered mine. Therefore, a child, a minor who doesn't have that kind of legal sense of space because his parent will come and take him away. He hasn't really established his spot. He doesn't have this halacha. But this that the Chachamim have given us, this, that is, we have institutionalized this legal reality that my immediate space is considered mine, is only for this area. Meaning I don't get this, is only in this concept. I don't get to say that I own this. I can't start digging it or cutting it up because I'm in a public place. But it's considered mine, even though I'm in a public place, as far as having the power to acquire an item that is now considered to be transacted from a benefactor to a beneficiary. And therefore, if somebody else walks by and grabs it, I can consider him a thief. And he can't say, well, it's just sitting there on the ground. But it wasn't just the ground any more than my backyard is just the ground. Even though we're in a public space, it becomes a little bit mine. Hopefully you understand the idea. But again, it's only mine as far as it belonging to me in this natural space. Think about this when you park your car, you leave a natural space. Why don't I go right up to the other guy? This is just a way that society has established a certain sense of dominion. Now, this idea that my immediate space is empowered to be considered so much part of mine, so much owned by me, that anything that comes in to that space can be considered as if I have taken possession of it, it still carries a certain more profound quality. Because what if it is a place that's just wide open? Meaning, let's say a person owns a big giant farm. So of course it's his farm, but there's no way that he could protect this. There's no way that he could know. So if somebody, for example, let's say a debtor says, oh, I left the bag of money I owe you in your mailbox. So we'd say that's considered to have returned the item. What if I leave it in your farm? So I says, what do you mean? There's no way that I could protect it. There's no way I can know about it. It's so far out. Okay. That it is not considered mine. I haven't really acquired it until I declare that package on my farm is mine. And again, I know that there's certain technical points here, but we're all familiar with this just in a social construct. Whereas if it's right in my immediate space, the guy walks by the beach and he says, oh, here's the $20 I owe you. And he drops it right next to me. So now he's paid me back the $20. I didn't put it in my hand. Doesn't matter. Just like he put it in my mailbox or he put it in under the door of my office, he's put it into my domain. Even if I don't say I hereby empower the immediacy of my space to take possession of it. To the point that it is his, even if he didn't notice it, and even if he didn't acknowledge it. So this requires an explanation, since the whole idea is that it's considered to be in his space and that immediate spot, even though he's really in a public park. But the guy who owes him the money walked by and put the $20 right next to him, it's considered like he owns it. Whereas if he put it in the guy's farm, which is clearly his private personal property, but in practice, there's no way that he could know it and protect it. It's not considered to have been transferred. How is it possible so that this, what I'm going to use this term, I'm not sure if it's the proper usage, this legal fiction that we have created, that his immediate space is considered to be belonging to him, should have a more profound degree of ownership, a more profound extension of the private citizen than his big giant farm, which is clearly his. And the explanation is that in that space, that's his identity. And again, you think about this, whatever public space, the shul, People have their makom kavua. That's their space. They put their books there and so on. Now, they don't own it. They can't decide to paint the wall differently there, but they own it in the sense that it is given to them. Even if you go to some public concert and you sit in your chair, you have a sense that this is your space. Why? Because it is identified immediately with you. Because you're there, your very being naturally extends to incorporate that space. Whereas the farm that I own in Montana, even though there's a document that says it's mine, since my physical presence is not there, it doesn't have that same expression of my core identity. And that's why the immediate space effortlessly, automatically is a means of acquisition, because my presence is immediately obvious there. Whereas the farm, my presence is not. Because this aspect of my identity is independent of my acknowledgement of it. But when this essential characteristic of my identity is influencing that immediate space, it can even incorporate anything that's brought there, like the debtor who pays me back my $20, it's now considered in my space. Why? Because I'm there. That is, the power of the person himself, every aspect of his character, of his spiritual identity, is completely present, so that anything brought within that space is considered subsumed within the individual, within his immediate space, to draw it down and to reveal his core identity. It is only that the capacity for a person to incorporate something, in this case, something physical, into his identity, that is, to take something that is naturally not part of his estate and make it his estate, is specifically when he reveals the very essence of his existence. Now, the legalities, I hope everybody roughly understands it. We're not here to study that so much, but the concept is that when there is awareness of Hashem, even matters that don't appear naturally to be godly suddenly become godly. What are we doing now? If you were to ask me 10 minutes ago or half an hour ago, what is this? It's a computer. Now I don't see it as a computer. I see it as a tool for us to learn Torah. Because we have brought the awareness of Hashem, we have immediately, automatically, in a certain sense, effortlessly, subsumed all material matters into the core character of God's identity, because we have brought to our consciousness the immediacy of the infinity of Hashem. So the greatest objective is that which is naturally most antagonistic to godliness should be subsumed within godliness. Now we know this, we recognize this culturally. We know, historically, and things change and different circumstances, not meant to be a criticism. There was an attitude, and maybe it still exists in certain arenas, where the basic perspective of Torah people is, we're good, and they are not good. If they want, we'll let them be good too, like us, but if not, then they're not good. So we're here, and now, if we're nice guys, we'll let you in too. But essentially, we're good, and if we're nice, we'll invite other people to be good like us. Or we can say, we are aligned with the infinity of Hashem. This person is also aligned with the infinity of Hashem, but they're unaware of it. So our objective is not to make them be something they're not. Our objective is more profoundly, more focused on that guy who is not naturally part of the club. This isn't some sort of club where we identify ourselves by what we are not. And again, maybe you recognize this in the social sense, whether it's in Torah or it's that high school kind of thing, where we identify ourselves with those who are like ourselves and everyone else is other. And the objective, the message of Hasidus is that the other is not other. what we need to do is to illustrate not only the person, but the physical item, even the animal world, even the mineral world, even the vegetable world, that when we can invite that into the infinity of Hashem by exposing its innate infinity of Hashem, we have not only done them a favor, because I'm a nice guy, we have essentially effectuated the entire objective of creation. So rather than seeing my involvement with that guy as being some kindness that I do, I start to see it as it's all one and the same. There is a term, you may have heard it. It exists in certain areas, and the Rebbe really disliked this term. And the term is called kiruv rechokim. This is a term, it means to bring close those who are far. The Rebbe does not like this term. How do I know who's close and who's far? What do you mean? I'm good. I do mitzvahs. That person doesn't do mitzvahs. I'm good, they're bad. That's true if we're only looking at the measurable, at the giloy, at what is revealed of godliness. When I am looking at the essence of God, how do I know who's good and who's bad? So the truest, the most profound illustration of the infinity of Hashem is not to bring in the buddies, like we call in Yiddish, unzera, the inside guys. It is to include every aspect of all of creation. Based on all of this, in chapter 21, we now understand how the preparatory vessel to the coming of Mashiach, how do we bring Mashiach into the world, is specifically through spreading the teachings of Hasidus. Why? Because we're Hasidim, and therefore we're promoting that, if we do it, it's because Hasidus focuses on what the concept of Mashiach is. It's not like, okay, if you'll be a good boy, I'll give you a lollipop. There's no cause effect. There's no correlation between good behavior and lollipops. Here, it's a cause effect. It's like if you eat less, you lose weight. Well, who knew? If you exercise, you get stronger. What a coincidence. Every time the thermometer goes up, it gets hotter. Who knew? So the correlation between the spreading of Hasidus and the coming of Mashiach is not a random reward, it's a cause effect. Why? That since the revelation of Mashiach is that he transforms all of creation, even the flesh, that is in Mashiach, it's not just, again, we're not here to study the comparative religion. When Mashiach comes, everyone will know that we're right, we're good. It's not this triumphant thing. The concept of Mashiach is not like the good guys are going to heaven and the rest of you can just go to. The concept of Mashiach is that he makes godliness evident to all matter, even to the fleshy eyes. Like the pasuk says, that all flesh will see him. And therefore, what's the way to do that? Is the spreading of Hasidus, which illustrates the infinity of Hashem that is found within all matter, even within the physical, not just amongst the pious. The illustration of this concept of the wellsprings of Hasidus is specifically when they're spread to the outside. So again, it's not just really I want to sit and learn here, but since I'm a nice guy, I'll go and teach that guy. But that's just some sort of second best thing, that I'm a nice guy and I'm going to go teach that other person. On the contrary, the more we can illustrate the extension of Torah outside of the quote natural purview, the more we have truly achieved something that is distinctive to Torah. That's where Torah is to be found. Now, we know this in our own practical circumstance. You want to know if you truly know something? Try explaining it to somebody who has no idea what you're talking about. Geniuses talk to geniuses. You know why they like to talk to geniuses? Because it's easy. The geniuses understand the geniuses. Everybody gets along. You want to really know if you understand something? Go explain it to somebody who has no idea what you're talking about. This doesn't only do a kindness to the one to whom it is being explained. It is the expression, is like stretching the character of the teacher. As long as we only remain on the inside, we don't yet see the full-on extent of it. It's like why some artists are very afraid to display their work, because some knucklehead will come by and say, that's ugly. I mean, I think about this. There used to be a thing called bookstores. You probably heard of it. You walk around in bookstores, thousands of books. Every person who wrote a book put their whole life into it. And I look at it for half a second and say, that's not interesting. I move on to the next thing. I mean, imagine if the person was standing right there. They say, here's my life's work. I wrote this novel. I wrote this textbook. And I go, where do we truly see it? When it's expressed to the outside, to the person. Because when I say, hey, that's a book, I never thought I would be interested in this. This is an idea, a little bit of a far afield. They say one of the problems with Google is you always find what you're looking for. So you never discover something by accident. When we were kids, like we're a bunch of old fuddy-duddies, you were looking for something, and you found something else. There's no discovery. You always find. That's why we live in a world that's becoming, a broader world, pardon my soapbox here, more and more bifurcated. Because I can find the books, the podcasts, the lessons that support my pre-existing the biases. Those are evident and easily discovered. The greater challenge is to find that which is not natural. Imagine you can persuade someone who's not interested at all in what you have to be saying. And on the contrary, you are able to persuade that person to become interested. That is truly an illustration of the intensity of the concept, that it caught somebody who thought they had no interest in that whatsoever. That's the chutzah, that's the outside. That since the proper way to prepare ourselves to be receptive to the concept of Mashiach is the very fabric of Hasidus, therefore it is absolutely necessary to express the wellsprings of Hasidus to that which is not its natural ally, to the chutzah, to the point that we transform the chutzah into the mayones. Now, as you'll note, the phrase that Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov was not that you'll spread the waters to the outside, but the wellspring itself. And this, in fact, in my shameless attempt at cross-promotion, is really what we do on Tuesday nights when we talk to the guy who's in this, chutzah in Myanmar, or he's in Taiwan, or any other crazy place that we've talked to in Virgin Islands. And he has brought not just a little bit of Yiddishkeit. We'll bring him some boxed matzah and some dreidel, and we'll say, that's enough. No, we're going to bring him Rabbeinu Tom's to fill it. We're going to bring him, the $200 mezuzahs. We're going to bring him the $30 a pound shmura matzah. We're going to bring the full-on intensity of Kedusha into this, pardon the pun, sort of God-forsaken place. We thought it was forsaken. We thought God didn't live in the Virgin Islands. God doesn't live in Las Vegas. God isn't interested, no one's interested in God in those places. And he comes there not just to bring them some sprinkles of water from the motherland, but to bring them the very essence of it. Okay. And that's why through the expression, I mean that in the sense of the extension of the well springs, we will bring Mashiach. As the Alter Rebbe says, because what we're doing is we are refining the materialism. That is, we are making ourselves and the world more sensitized to godliness, that even the physical should be sensitized, the body and the world itself, so that godliness can express itself without having to be disguised in something. That is, like we can, with a friend, truly express ourselves and not just have to put on our happy face. And from this additional expression of the Jewish people, we light up the darkness even of the nations. So we don't just, our objective is not to destroy the nations or to overrun the nations. Our objective is to bring out the light that exists within the nations. And that's why the pasuk says that all flesh will see you, all those who dwell in the land. And as we explained, because this is the ultimate purpose of the days of Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim, not just for us, the inside guys, it's for the whole world, literally, including the nations, that they should have this awareness. And it's all linked to us. The more we bring that godliness to the world, the more we are able to do this throughout the entire stretch of the exile, because what will produce the consequence of mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, with the complete and true, that is true under all circumstances, even outside of the shul and the yeshiva, that we bring godliness into those working, we bring godliness into the grocery, we bring godliness into the routine and the mundane, not just in the yeshiva, not just in the shul. We don't put away our siddur and say, okay, now I say goodbye to Shlomi, and now I put on my Sam face and I go out there and kill until mincha, which is tempting to do, but we bring the kedusha into the physical world. And this is the objective and message of Chassidus. This concludes the mimer. God willing, next week we'll have a new mimer, which I haven't decided what it's going to be yet because I haven't thought about it, but I will, and I will send it out to people, and hopefully it's online and everyone can follow. So good night, everyone. Tomorrow night, 9:00, we'll talk some Parsha. Thanks for joining. I'll post it on the YouTube. And remember, next Motzei Shabbos, we're having a special guest, but you do have to sign up to get the link because it's not going to be this link. Good night, good night, good night.